directly in the slave trade by accepting 13,000 enslaved persons at all. J.P. Morgan's predecessors, at least two of their predecessors, Citizens Bank and Canal.
Bear with me. We are going to get into this topic. And the topic today, guys, is do Black Americans deserve reparations? I'm going to play this video and then we're going to get into it. Thank you for joining me. My name is Brian.
Canal Bank in the interval 1831 to 1865. Were engaged directly in the slave trade by accepting 13,000 enslaved persons as collateral for loans that were issued in Louisiana in the mid-19th century. When borrowers defaulted, the bank took direct ownership of these individuals and apparently sold them off at auction. I would propose that the role of slavery in American society is so pervasive that if we were to address what these institutions ought to do as of 2005, we need to go beyond the decisions that some of them have made, like the Wachovia Corporation, for example, to provide a certain amount of scholarships for African Americans, and come directly to the question of the construction of an alliance of lobbyists who would promote the case for reparations for African Americans with the United States Congress. I would argue that all of these institutions collectively should do so, and I'm going to try to make a case as to why this makes a great deal of sense this evening. Well, let me begin by suggesting what I perceive to be as the primary objectives of a program of reparations. Three major factors I view as the primary objectives of a program of reparations. First, acknowledgement. Second, redress. And third, closure. Acknowledgement, redress, and closure. Acknowledgement refers to recognition of a grievous injustice committed by an institution or group that bears responsibility for the action. This includes the necessity of a formal apology. Redress refers to compensatory actions taken to mitigate, to the extent possible, the long-term consequences of the grievous injustice. Now, with respect to reparations due African Americans, this would involve the design and implementation of a program that would eliminate historically generated racial disparities in the United States caused by slavery, legal segregation, and ongoing discrimination. And finally, closure refers to a settling of accounts, a healing process brought to fruition. Concretely, again, with respect to reparations for African Americans, it would mean that in the aftermath of an effective reparations program, no further claims for race-based initiatives on behalf of blacks for the wrongs of slavery, Jim Crow, and past discrimination would be forthcoming. Now, this closure aspect really bothers some folks, but I'm going to come back to that. Okay? Now, ironically, recent interest in this issue for African Americans, I think, was sparked most vigorously by the notorious advertisement attacking reparations that was placed by David Horowitz in numerous campus newspapers on behalf of his Center for the Study for Popular Culture about 3 years ago. Thus far, there is no official support for reparations from major credible civil rights organizations in the United States, including the NAACP and the National Urban League. The organization that has stood most solidly as an advocacy group for reparations is the National Coalition on Black Reparations, known as NCOBRA, which is not as widely known or as widely visible as either the NAACP and the National Urban League. And NCOBRA also conceives of itself as functioning philosophically outside of a narrow civil rights discourse, and instead as operating as part of a wider human rights discourse.
Okay, guys. So I would like to introduce myself. Um, my name is Brian. I want to open up an honest, thoughtful conversation about why Black Americans deserve. And as we all may know, that this topic can be seen as extremely controversial. But I believe it's time to bring it to the kitchen table. Not with emotion, not with anger, but with logic, history, and with all due respect. My goal in speaking about this is not to divide people, guys. My goal is to create a safe space where we can examine the facts, the legacy of systemic injustice, and the real possibilities for repair. I hope we can move beyond emotion as this looks like in practical terms. Okay, guys, if you're looking at my screen, you see um, lots of Black Americans standing and holding the flag of the United States of America. Black Americans are just that. We are Americans. The reason why I phrased the question as do Black Americans deserve reparations is because when there is a question, when there is a question, then our brain computer goes into following and finding an answer, guys. So what got me thinking about this topic was the original video that I played, and that's from a professor, William Darity, and he wrote a book called The Case, uh, The Case for Reparations from Here to Equality. And I think that that book is a must-read book. And although that particular video was from 2005, 20 years later in 2025, it still rings true. So in the book, he addresses three main ideas. Um, he acknowledgement, redress, and closure. He challenges the reader as well as the people who make up our government to acknowledge the wrongs of the initial sin. Redress, which is provide concrete compensation, including direct payments to Black Americans. Offer closure, and this comes as a mutual understanding that the debt has been repaid while still preserving historical memory. Okay, he provides factual evidence of the historical injustice of slavery and beyond, because reparations aren't limited to slavery. They encompass the failure to fulfill promises such as 40 acres and a mule, Jim Crow laws, structural segregation, massacres such as Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921, Wilmington, 1898, and countless others, guys. Redlining, predatory lending, highway constructions through Black neighborhoods, ongoing discrimination in housing, education, and criminal justice. So that's some of the historical framework of why Black Americans deserve reparations. Now, he even goes deeper into why the Black Americans should be only those that are from the lineage of the people who suffered the original sin. So that would exclude people from the Caribbean, people from Africa. We're only talking about the people who ancestors experienced injustice due to the government sanctioning slavery. And one of the arguments is that the government that sanctioned slavery still exists today, which is the United States government, which the government is made up of people. Now, like I stated, I believe it's time we bring this to the kitchen table, not with anger, but with logic, history, and respect. My goal isn't to divide people, create a space where we can examine the facts, injustice, and the real possibility for repair. And if you don't know, my name is Brian, okay? And this is going to be a thoughtful conversation about why Black Americans deserve reparations. The next thing the author William Darity talks about is three target. Why we need reparations is because our wealth was stolen from us. We built not solely, but we put in the majority of the work to build the richest country in the history of the world. We want to eliminate the racial wealth gap. The aim is to completely close the wealth gap, because how was the racialized wealth gap created? It was created because Black Americans were enslaved. If Black Americans owned the means of their production and their labor, the wealth gap would not exist. So Black Americans hold only 2% of national wealth versus uh 13% population share. Okay. So the average white household wealth exceeds Black households by $840,000, guys. Reparation payments would aim to equalize this gap, totaling an estimating of 10 or 12 trillion over 10 years, is what the author is arguing. Eligibility criteria, lineage. So this is not race based, it's lineage based. So the lineage qualifier is must have at least one enslaved ancestor in the US. So that means, for example, let's say one parent is of European origin and another parent is a Black American who can trace their lineage back to slavery in the Americas, then the offspring of their relationship, they would qualify for um, reparations, identity. Okay, the person who receives reparations, they have to identify as a Black American, African American Negro for at least 10 to 12 years prior to an enactment. If Black Americans were to receive 10 or 12 trillion dollars over a 10-year period for repayment and repair and restitution for slavery, and aims to eliminate the racial wealth gap, uh, to right historical wrongs, as well as to give the United States a moral framework to acknowledge, redress, and close and offer closure to the people that suffered in this country who built the nation. A lot of people that don't classify or self-identify as Black, African American, and Negro now would then say, well, I'm Negro, or I'm African American, or I'm Black. But so the two-pronged test would be: one, you have to have at least one enslaved ancestor in the US. Two, you have to be self identified as Black, African American, Negro for at least 10 to 12 years prior to the reparation enactment. Now, how will this occur? Guys, we can do direct payments. Direct payments are crucial, it's critical. Why? Because while some people may say, well, we don't want to do direct payments, we want to do education, entrepreneurship, college, HBCUs. Well, the problem with that, guys, is that that's power to institutions instead of giving it directly to the people who are affected. Could you agree with that? That's either true or it's false, right? Imagine something horrible happens to your family, and instead of paying you directly, someone says, well, we're going to donate the money to a charity, and the charity is going to give you the person who is bereaved financial payments. It wouldn't make sense. A person would say, no, I'm the person that suffered the wrong. In order to indemnify and make me whole, pay me directly. Don't pay someone else. Don't pay a charity or an organization. So what the author argues is that an estimate of around 250,000, 350,000 per eligible person or individual. So that means every black person who is self-identified as black, African American, Negro for at least 10 to 12 years prior to an enactment, who has lineage as one enslaved, at least in the U.S., should receive reparations. And the total payment should be around 10 to 12 trillion over the next 10 years, but we might even say 20 trillion because we are currently experiencing inflation. But the goal would be around 250 to $350,000 per individual. Now I know some people would say, well, that's a lot of money. Where are we going to get this money from? I want you to keep in mind that Black Americans were restricted, confined, abused, discriminated against in regards to housing, education, the criminal justice system, predatory lending, highway construction through black neighborhoods, Jim Crow laws, structural segregation, massacres, lynchings. We built the entire framework for as the financial industry of the Americas. Black Americans did not just pick cotton. Black Americans, their hard work built the insurance industry, the banking industry, the medical industry, the finances gained through the enslavement of the Black Americans is what built the financial wealth of the entire United States. And that wealth was compounded and locked racially into the white community through segregation. And this is why the civil rights movements occur, right? Black people don't buy white people just because they're white. The wealth is locked into their community. That's our wealth that was stolen from us. So I think that is only right that we have this conversation, not to be a, but to bring it to the kitchen table. Because the more that we talk about this, and if we just ask a question, do Black Americans deserve reparations? I would like to hear someone discuss why we should not reparations. Present your argument in a logical, non-emotional manner. Because morally, it would be beneficial to our government and our country. It would foster the grounds to produce justice, to right an historic wrong. Also, think about all of the money that's spent militarily to oppress the Black Americans historically and in reality now. The judicial system, the education system, all of the money to keep millions of people subjugated. That same money could be spent to foster hope, unity, to right historical wrongs. Okay, so he gets into responses to objections. So he says that moral depth outweighs logical concerns like cost, who qualifies, or inflations, who are as described as deflections. Okay, so a lot of times people will start saying, well, it costs too much, or who's going to qualify, or inflation. Those are deflections, guys, because other groups have received the reparations. This is an important part of the story to be remembered. Native Americans received reparations. When the United States and Mexico went to war, Mexico was paid $15 million for territories lost. Japanese victims of internment councils pay reparations. What happened to the Jews during the Holocaust? They were paid reparations. So it's not as though us asking for reparations is something that has not occurred before. We're just asking for our turn to be considered for justice. So comparable federal investments such as Social Security pandemic relief shows that such spending is feasible. We've already experienced with the pandemic that the government can actually put the money directly in all of our bank accounts. The government has already shown us through pandemic relief and social securities that they can directly pay us the money that's owed to us. About $250 to $350,000 per person. And I would say even if we went as low as 175,000 per person, that would be a good start. I think that would be a good start because we're talking about centuries, guys, of our enslavement in this country. And we are Americans. We have fought in every war. We are proud of the nation that we built. This is our country. We've been here longer than a lot of other people. The only other as long as us. Well, really, no one has been here as long as us. We was here before it was a country. We was here during the building of the country, the construction of the country, because we had to build it. And we're here now. Responses to our objections, like I said, is when they talk about the cost, who qualifies, or inflation, this is just deflections, guys. And like I say, uh, through Social Security pandemic relief, this shows that not only can they afford to make the payments because everybody got pandemic relief. Once you reach a certain age and you qualify, everyone gets Social Security. So to argue that 40 million people can't get their money is ridiculous. The federal government is who responsible. So we're not talking about your next door neighbor, or we're not talking about people like that. We're talking about the federal government. The federal existed and they sanctioned our enslavement. So this is why we deserve reparations, and our that same government is should pay us. Okay. While direct payments anchor the program, which means it's a big part of the program, we're not just talking about money, but it's a big part of the conversation because if a person would argue, well, we'll give you land where you need money to buy land. We'll give you education where you need money to get education. Well, we can do this or we can do that. The United States is a capitalist country, you guys. So let's start with that capital. It also should include targeted investments in education, health care, entrepreneurship, and asset building to support long-term community resilience. Guys, if it takes a village to raise a child, that's a metaphor for it takes a system to support us. If we want Black Americans to live up to their full potential, and we have already contributed greatly while under distress. We have contributed militarily, educationally. We have contributed to the story and the history of what makes this country. We sacrificed our livelihoods. Many of our grandfathers fought in the First and Second World War, Korean War, um, Vietnam War, the Desert Storm Wars, the wars, across the world that we had to fight to defend our beautiful country. So we have done everything that it was ever asked of us to do in order to make America great. And I believe if we're going to make America great again, it's 3 or 4 or 5 things we have to do. One, we have to acknowledge and redress monetarily and structurally to provide closure for what happened to the Black Americans in this country. We have to look at this through a historical scope. Slavery, guys. The difference between what happened to us and any other group is that our slavery was racialized. So if you were a person who had a black parent, your child would then be considered a slave. So we couldn't even get out of it because it was racialized. Since with other people, they had indentured servitude, but it was contractual and it was only for a certain number of years. We couldn't get out of slavery because of the color of our skin. So this is why the direct payments should be made lineage based, meaning you have to have at least one ancestor that was in a victim of American slavery, and you have to have self-identified as Black, African American, and Negro for the past 10 to 12 years. So we're going to address the historical scope, slavery, Jim Crow, systemic racism. We're also going to target, or reparations should target, to eliminate the wealth gap that was created through slavery, which we estimate, or the author estimates, to be about 10 to 12 trillion. And the structure, it should be a federal program with direct payments and systemic investment. And the author argues, William Darrenty argues, that it should be moral accountability, not optional charity. This is something that our ancestors already fought for, they already earned. And if we wouldn't have gone through slavery, it would be no need for redress. So I would love to hear what you think. Please comments. Don't be afraid. This is not a emotional thing. This is a logical thing. I would love to hear what you think. And the question is, do Black Americans